And now we're going to take a quick look at the Industrial Revolution. So during the Industrial Revolution, we see that the economy and the society, especially in Britain in the late 18th century and early 19th century, changes a great deal, and in many, many different forms. Um, the Industrial Revolution spread to many other parts of the globe as well. The term derives from the comparison which contemporaries drew from the fundamental changes of the French Revolution. And so that was where the title actually comes from. Although one can find the origins of industrialization in earlier centuries, and although the changes were at a very incomplete stage by the mid-19th century, an unprecedented shift was underway, which was to change the nature of human society forever. We live today with its global consequences, both the benefits to mankind, which include things like a higher living standard and life expectancy, and there are many other great benefits, but we also live with the darker side of the Industrial Revolution, and that includes its inequity and its political tension of capitalism and a capitalist world that developed, and the threat of ecological disaster because of that development. And so for these reasons, the subject is a vital one to study and to understand. And design plays a very important role in the whole idea of the Industrial Revolution. Several sectors of manufacturing saw significant transformations that impacted the lives of thousands and thousands of workers across the globe. Perhaps the most dramatic change was the rise of the steam-powered factory, which lay behind the remarkable productivity gains in the textile sector. The image of a smoking factory, chimneys dominating the skyline of a northern town by the mid-19th century, together with the long hours and poor conditions of work experienced by many factory workers, and including children, are central to the image of the period. Yet factories were limited to the textile sector in the early stages, together with some pottery works in this period, and such buildings never became the location for work for most of the people in the industrial society. In Staffordshire, for example, an industry developed which gave the world good and cheap pottery. Chinaware bought in by the East India Company often furnished the model. Josiah Wedgwood, who lived from 1730 to 1795, was one of the people who revolutionized the production and sale of pottery. From 1700 on, the Staffordshire potters used water wheels or windmills to turn their machines, which ground and mixed all of their materials. After 1850, machinery was used extensively in the pottery making process, and it was no longer done by hand. The price, of course, then of crockery fell, and eating and drinking consequently became more hygienic, so that was a good thing. The textile industry had special problems, though. It took 4 spinners to keep up with 1 cotton loom, and 10 people to prepare the yarn for 1 woolen weaver. Spinners were busy, but weavers often had to be idle as they waited for the yarn. In 1733, John Kay, a Lancaster mechanic, patented his flying shuttle. Weaving could then be done more quickly, but it was still delayed until yarn was available and in more abundance. By 1771, Richard Arkwright created what was known as the water frame for producing yarn. So when we think about the Industrial Revolution, we can look at this crockery and things that were made, and how, but one of the things that it did was put people out of work. So people who are making handmade pottery, they couldn't keep up with the price. And then here we have an image of the spinning jenny, and it was patented by James Hargreaves, and it could spin many threads simultaneously. In 1779, Samuel Compton combined the jenny and the water frame in a known machine called the Compton's Mule, which produced quantities of fine, strong yarn. And so then the spinners, weren't sitting and waiting. The yarn famine had come to an end. Between 1780 and 1860, other textile processes were all mechanized. In 1784, a machine was patented which printed patterns on the surface of cotton or linen by the means of rollers. Here we can see a young worker. She's probably about maybe 10 years old or 11 years old, and she would average, a 16 to 18-hour day for pennies, literally. In 1894, Northrop produced an automatic loom, and when the power loom became efficient, women replaced men as weavers. Although they were still hand weavers in the Paisley shawl trade as late as 1850, by 1812, the cost of making cotton yarn had dropped 9/10, and by 1800, the number of workers needed to turn wool into yarn had been reduced by 4/5. By 1840, the labor cost of making the best woolen cloth in the world had fallen by at least half. And so, it really behooved them to be able to make it by machine. An English philanthropist, Stanhope, Lord Charles Stanhope, conceived in 1795 the first time for a hand printing press totally built in iron. So you can see how it sort of resembles that Gutenberg press that we saw earlier, but it was made with metal. With new improvements in pressing and ink systems, these printing presses permitted one production of 100 exemplars per hour. That was a huge increase from doing it by hand. The Stanhope press arrived in France in 1814. The process that Henri de Balzac describes in his book Illusions Perdues is about this particular Stanhope press. And then there was a high-speed printing press that was also developed by Friedrich Gottlob Koning and Andreas Friedrich Bauer in 1812. This is an image of it in the Deutsche Museum in Munich. Koenig and Bauer invented the world's first high-speed printing press, where they could, in the beginning, they couldn't interest anyone in their native Germany for their invention. So what they did was they took it to England, and in 1814 they sold it to the London Times, and thus initiated the incredibly huge age of the massive media. So this is where we really see media taking off because of this particular press. Darius Wells of New York found the means for mass producing letters in 1827 and published the first known wood type catalog in 1828. The usual procedure was to draw the letters on wood or paper, which was pasted onto the wood, and then cut around them with a knife or a graver or a gouging out at parts to be left blank. And there you can see some of the wood type. Wells, however, introduced a basic invention, the lateral router, that in combination with a pantograph introduced by William Leavenworth in 1834, constituted the essential materials for mass-producing wood type. In the preface to his first wood type catalog, Wells outlines the advantages of wood type. They were half the cost of the metal, they prepared the machine, and had a smooth, even surface. Unequal cooling caused metal to be concave on top, and in interest of the font, the metal type could be 7 years, and then you'd have to, you wouldn't have to buy wood type for much longer. So it was much more even. This is an image that you saw in the beginning of this lecture, and it is the Crystal Palace. The Crystal Palace was a cast iron and plate glass structure originally built in Hyde Park in London to house what was known as the Great Exhibition of 1851. More than 14,000 exhibitors came to the Crystal Palace from around the world and gathered in its 990,000 square foot exhibition space to display examples of technology and what was happening in this industrial revolution. And these were exhibitors that were from all over the globe. The design of the Crystal Palace, there you can see it from another angle, was made by Joseph Paxton. It was 1,851 feet long with an interior height of 128 feet. That's pretty tall. The invention of the cast plate glass method in 1848 made it possible to produce large sheets of cheap but strong glass, and its use in the Crystal Palace created a structure with the greatest area of glass ever seen in any building, and it completely astonished visitors when they could look through these clear walls and ceilings, and it didn't require any interior lights during the day. They were just amazed. So here we have an image of what that might have looked like on the inside, and there you can see all the people kind of on the ground floor and then the sort of side wings. The exhibition opened on the 1st of May in 1851 by Queen Victoria and Prince Albert. It was the first of the world's fair exhibitions of culture and industry. There were some 100,000 objects displayed along more than 10 miles by, again, over 14,000 exhibitors. Britain occupied half of the display space inside with exhibits from the home country and the empire. France was the largest foreign contributor. The exhibits were grouped into 4 main categories: raw materials, machinery, manufacture, and fine arts. The exhibit ranged from everything from the Koh-i-Noor diamond, which is this huge diamond from India, Sever's porcelain and musical organs, to a massive hydraulic press and a fire engine. There was also a 27-foot tall crystal fountain. Just amazing. Here's an image of the cover of the catalog that was exhibited at the Great Exhibition of 1851. And I actually have a copy of this catalog that was produced in the 1970s. I think you might be able to still buy copies of the catalog, but this was an actual reproduction of the original catalog. And it's really interesting. That's where I got some of the images for this lecture from. In 1851, of course, Great Britain was arguably the leader of the Industrial Revolution, and they felt very secure in that ideal. The Great Exhibition of 1851 in London was conceived and symbolized the industrial, the military, and the economic superiority of Great Britain, and they wanted to make sure that the rest of the world knew that. Just representing the feats of Britain itself would have excluded many of the technological achievements pioneered by the British in its many colonies and protectorates, so it was decided to make the exhibit truly international, with invitations being extended to almost all of the colonized world. The British also felt that it was important to show their achievements right alongside those of less civilized countries. The prevailing attitude in England at that time was ripe for the somewhat arrogant parading of accomplishments. Many felt secure economically and politically, and Queen Victoria was eager to reinforce that feeling of contentment in her reign. It was during the mid-1850s that the word Victorian actually emerged. It began to be employed to express a new self-consciousness, both in relationship to the nation and to the period through which it was passing, and that was her reign, which I believe lasted about 62 years, because she was crowned when she was 18 years old. The exhibition was a great triumph for Victoria and for her German husband, Albert, whom she married in 1840. Despite outbursts of opposition to Albert by the press, and the family life of the Victorian court began to be considered increasingly as a model for the whole country. Albert appreciated the achievements of the Prime Minister Robert Peel's political and military advances and publicly advocated for Britain to be involved in the advancement of industry and science, and they were. These facts began to sway opinion in his favor as a respectable foundation of the royal family and royal family life, and industrial supremacy were becoming connected and rapidly acquainted with the monarchy of Victoria and Albert. Conceived by Prince Albert, the Great Exhibition was held in Hyde Park in London in a specially constructed Crystal Palace, which we looked at earlier. The Crystal Palace was originally designed again by Sir Joseph Paxton, and only 10 days was a huge iron Goliath with over 1 million feet of glass. It was important that the building used to showcase these achievements be grandiose and innovative. And again, over 14,000 exhibits were displayed and viewed by over 6,200,000 visitors. So really, it was a great, great success. The millions of visitors that journeyed from all over the world to see this great exhibition of 1851 marveled at the Industrial Revolution that was propelling Britain into the greatest power of the time. Among the 14,000 exhibits from all around the world, there were the Jacquard loom, an envelope machine, tools, kitchen appliances, steel-making displays, reaping machines, and more from all over the world, including the United States. The objects on display came from different parts of the world, including India and countries with recent white settlements such as Australia and New Zealand, and they were all what constituted the new British Empire. And so that kind of concludes the whole Crystal Palace. Another one of the things that was exhibited at the fair, at this great exhibition, which we cannot exclude, and we're going to just really quickly look at, is photography. So the French physicist Joseph Nepis made the first negative on paper in 1816 and the first known photograph on metal. He called it a heliograph in 1826. By the latter day, he had directed his investigations away from paper surfaces and negatives, having invented in the meantime what is now called the photogravure process of mechanical reproduction, and towards sensitized metallic surfaces. In 1827, he had begun his association with Louis-Jacques Mandé Daguerre, a French painter who had been experimenting along similar lines in photography. The partnership was formed, and together they collaborated until Nepis's death in 1833, after which Daguerre continued their work for the next 6 years. In 1839, he announced the invention of a method for making a direct positive image on a silver plate, which then came to be known as the daguerreotype, a definite part of history all around the world, and documenting things that we never would have had available to us had they not done that. And so that is the conclusion of our lecture for the beginnings of the Industrial Revolution. Definitely, I think there's a lot that you can pursue here. Daguerreotypes would be a wonderful place to start, the beginning of photography, anything about the Crystal Palace, all really good subject matter. So until next time.